The desert wind breathed cold upon the tents, whispering through the reeds like a ghost that knew Jacob's name. He stood apart from his camp, eyes fixed on the dark ribbon of the Jabbok River. Behind him, the low hum of sleeping flocks, the soft rustle of Rachel and Leah tending to the children, life he had fought to build, now trembling under the shadow of Esau's approach. "Tomorrow," he murmured, the word cracking under its own weight. His hands, scarred, trembling, gripped the staff that had walked him through deception and years of exile. "Tomorrow my brother will see me as I am." He turned his gaze upward to a sky studded with distant fires. "God of my fathers, I am not worthy of the least of your mercies. Yet you said you would be with me. Do not let my children pay for my sins." The silence that followed was too vast to bear. Jacob's voice faltered into the wind, and only the river answered, cold, unyielding, reflecting a face that even he no longer recognized. That night, as the campfire dimmed and shadows claimed the earth, Jacob felt it, the ancient pull of destiny. He would cross the river before dawn, but something else was waiting in the dark, something that would not let him pass unchanged. The night deepened. Jacob gathered his wives and children, leading them toward the river's edge. The moonlight brushed their faces with ghostly silver. Rachel, her dark hair loose over her shoulders, held Joseph close, his small arms curled around her neck. Leah stood behind them, her eyes steady and unreadable. Jacob's voice was low, almost breaking. "Go on ahead, cross before me." His sons stirred, whispering questions, but he hushed them gently. "You must go. I'll follow once the flocks are settled." The water was cold, biting against their legs as the family waded through. The servants carried baskets and torches that sputtered in the wind. The sound of the river swallowed their words. Rachel turned once, her gaze lingering on Jacob. "Will you come soon?" Jacob nodded, though the answer sat heavy in his chest. He watched until their shapes vanished into the mist. Alone again, the echo of their footsteps faded into the hum of the river. The world grew smaller, quieter. Only the pulse of his heart and the restless water remained. The camp beyond the river began to fade from sight, their fires dimming behind the fog. Jacob remained on the near bank, pacing before the water. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper of wind sounded like a footstep. His mind replayed the years. Esau's cry of betrayal, the long exile, the deceit that had bought him blessings but cost him peace. "All these years, running," he muttered. "And now I must face what I've become." He sank to his knees, pressing his forehead to the ground. "God of Abraham, I crossed this river once with nothing but my staff. You have given me everything I asked for. Wives, children, flocks. But my heart is still a fugitive." The wind sighed across the valley, and for a fleeting instant it seemed to answer him, not in words, but in the stillness that felt alive. Jacob lifted his head, the faint glow of the moon catching his tears. He did not yet know the darkness had begun to stir with divine purpose. The hours bled into silence. Jacob built a small fire beside the river, its glow barely pushing against the shadows. His face flickered between light and darkness, between fear and faith. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a smooth stone, a keepsake from Bethel, where years ago he had seen angels ascending and descending. He whispered, "You promised to be with me." The fire cracked softly, sparks vanishing into the night. "But how can a man like me stand before you?" The answer came not as sound, but as a feeling, a slow, rising weight in the air. The night grew denser, as though the veil between worlds had thinned. The flames bent backward under an unseen wind. Jacob's breath caught, every sense sharpened. Something unseen was drawing near. For the first time in years, he felt no urge to flee. He straightened, eyes fixed on the darkness, ready for whatever or whoever was coming. The fire dwindled to embers. Jacob rose slowly, leaning on his staff. His eyes scanned the horizon. Nothing but silence and the soft pulse of the river. Yet something within him stirred, like a heartbeat not his own. He took a step toward the water. A gust of wind swept through the reeds, bending them low. The sound deepened, almost like a voice carried in the current. His heart thudded. From the corner of his eye, movement, a shadow at the far bend of the river. At first, he thought it a trick of the night. But the figure moved closer, silent, sure, until the outline of a man emerged against the moonlit fog. Jacob's hand tightened on his staff. The air thickened. Time slowed. He could feel the boundary between heaven and earth tremble. And though no words were spoken, Jacob knew. This was no thief, no brother, no mortal. The one he had prayed to had come, and would not leave until the night was done. The night was breathless. Jacob stood unmoving, his pulse echoing louder than the river's murmur. The figure came closer, silent, the sound of his steps swallowed by the mist. The man's outline flickered, as though made of both flesh and light. Jacob raised his staff. "Who are you?" His voice wavered between fear and command. No answer. The figure halted only a few paces away. In a sudden rush, the man lunged. Their bodies collided, sand and water splashing into the air. Jacob struck back instinctively, the staff falling useless as they grappled. The stranger's grip was impossibly strong. No words, only breath and struggle. The rhythm of mortal against divine. Jacob's muscles burned. His knees sank into the wet earth. Yet some force within him refused to yield. He had run from his brother, his past, his guilt, but not this, not tonight. And so, the two wrestled in silence beneath the moon, as heaven watched and time itself seemed to hold its breath. Their struggle rolled through the night like a storm without thunder. Jacob's breath tore through his chest, each gasp met by the unrelenting strength of the stranger. His hands clawed for grip on slick skin and wet sand. He tried to speak, but the man's arm locked around him, forcing his face toward the earth. Jacob's thoughts splintered. Fear, awe, fury, prayer, all merging into one wordless cry. Still he fought. Every moment was eternal. His robe tore, the staff lost to the river. The stranger's touch burned, yet it did not destroy. Jacob's heart screamed, "Why will you not speak?" A flash of moonlight broke through the clouds, and in that instant, Jacob saw the man's eyes, endless, unsearchable, like the depth of creation itself. His strength faltered, but his soul caught fire. This was no man. This was God, wrestling him into surrender. Pure time lost its meaning. Their bodies moved in rhythm. Each strike, each grapple, each breath, a heartbeat of the universe. The night air pulsed with the sound of effort, of purpose. Jacob's strength began to wane, his muscles trembling, yet something greater than exhaustion held him upright. He was fighting not merely to win, but to be known, to be changed. The stranger shifted, forcing Jacob down again. Sand scraped his cheek, the river hissed nearby. Still Jacob refused to yield. "I will not let go," he gasped, though his lips bled and his breath failed. And for the first time the stranger spoke, his voice a deep resonance that shook the air. "Let me go, for the dawn breaks." Jacob looked up, face twisted in pain and faith. "I will not let you go, unless you bless me." The air shuddered with silence. Then came a sudden flash. The stranger touched Jacob's hip, and pain like fire shot through his body. He cried out, collapsing into the sand. The angel did not strike again. He merely watched. Jacob writhed, one hand clutching his side, the other still gripping the divine form. His leg trembled, broken yet alive. Through gritted teeth, he groaned, "I will not let you go." The angel's gaze softened. "What is your name?" Jacob's eyes filled with tears. "Jacob," he whispered, the name heavy with deceit and fear. The name of the man he had been. The angel's voice echoed like wind over mountains. "No longer, Jacob. You are Israel, for you have wrestled with God and with men and have prevailed." Jacob fell forward, gasping, his strength gone, yet his spirit aflame. The stranger knelt and touched his face, and warmth flooded through him like peace long denied. The dawn broke full and blinding, washing away the shadowed shapes of the night. The angel stepped back into the light, his features softened into brilliance too great to behold. "Remember," the voice said, "not from lips but from everywhere. You are no longer the deceiver. You are Israel, one who has struggled and overcome." Jacob shielded his eyes as the figure dissolved into brightness. The river flared with gold, and the world seemed to breathe again. He lay there in silence, trembling, not from pain, but from revelation. When he rose, the limp was real, yet it carried no shame. He had wrestled with God and walked away blessed. The wind howled across the valley, scattering ashes from the dying fire. Jacob's body trembled, his hip aflame with pain, yet he clung to the angel as though life itself depended on it. The world beyond them was nothing, only this struggle, this sacred defiance. Every movement tore at his muscles. His breath came ragged, yet within the agony burned revelation. This was no punishment, but purification. The hand that wounded him also held him upright. Jacob's mind echoed with memories, his brother's cries, his father's blindness, the deceit that shadowed his youth. Each sin rose before him like specters. Still, he refused to let go. "If you will break me," he whispered, "then break all that is false within me." The angel's eyes shone with sorrow and glory. Their bodies stilled, locked in divine embrace, as dawn's first light crept across the water. Heaven had come down not to destroy the man, but to remake him. Jacob fell forward again, groaning, one hand pressed to his wounded side. The angel knelt beside him, watching, not as an adversary, but as a sculptor studies the form he has been shaping. The pain was unbearable, yet Jacob's spirit blazed brighter. "Who am I before you?" he rasped. "A liar, a thief, a coward, or the man you named tonight?" The angel's hand rested upon his shoulder, the one who would not let go. Jacob lifted his head. The night had not yet vanished. The stars still hung faint above the pale horizon. Every bone ached, but within that brokenness, peace began to form. He saw that the struggle had not been for victory, but for identity. And as he looked upon the angel, he understood. Grace was not the absence of struggle, but the light that enters through the wound. The angel rose to his full height, his silhouette framed by the growing dawn. "You have prevailed," he said, and his voice seemed to move through the very bones of the earth. "But your victory was not over me, it was over yourself." Jacob struggled to stand, leaning on his staff, his leg trembling under the wound. His eyes shone with new fire. "Then the name you gave me, Israel, it means," the angel's expression softened. "One who wrestles with God and lives." A smile flickered through Jacob's pain, slow and reverent. The first rays of sunlight touched his face, and he bowed low. "Then let this limp remind me, you touched me, and I still walk." The angel extended his hand. Jacob took it, and the two stood together as morning broke over the river. The angel stepped back toward the river, his outline dissolving into brilliance. Jacob watched, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. "You have seen God face to face," the voice spoke, "and yet your life is spared." Jacob bowed low, his heart swelling with gratitude too vast for words. The water lapped at his feet, and the wind carried the final whisper of the divine, "Walk in the light of the name." On the brilliance faded. Silence fell, pure and deep. Jacob stood alone, the dawn full upon him. His limp marked him, yes, but it also steadied him. He had met the eternal and lived. The river flowed on, unchanged, yet nothing within Jacob was the same. The deceiver was gone. Israel now faced the morning. The first birds sang across the valley as Jacob limped away from the river. Each step burned with pain, but also with meaning. He turned once to look back, at the place where heaven had touched earth. "This is Peniel," he whispered, his voice trembling. "For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved." He pressed his hand to his side, feeling the pulse of his wound, the living reminder of grace. The wind brushed through the reeds like a sigh of completion. Before him lay the world, his family waiting, his brother approaching, his destiny unfolding. He smiled faintly through tears. The sun rose fully now, blazing across his path. The man who once fled in deceit now walked in light, limping toward his future. Every step a testimony that God wounds only to heal. Morning bled gently into the valley. The Jabbok River shimmered with gold as the mist lifted. Jacob stood motionless, leaning on his staff, the wound in his hip throbbing with each heartbeat. The night was gone, but its memory lived in every breath. He turned his face toward the rising sun and closed his eyes. "Peniel," he whispered again, tasting the word as if it were a prayer. "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is spared." The air felt different now, thicker, heavier with holiness. His name echoed softly in his mind. Israel, not Jacob the deceiver, the one who clung to lies, but Israel, the man who clung to God. The pain in his leg pulsed with every step, yet he smiled. For the first time in his life, he did not feel chased by his past. The limp was no punishment. It was the seal of divine love, a mark of grace he would carry to his last breath. Jacob began to walk, slowly, each step deliberate. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, joy thrummed like a hidden drum. The air smelled of dew and new beginnings. He passed the place where his staff had fallen in the night and picked it up again. Its surface, splintered from the struggle, seemed now a holy relic. He pressed it to his heart, whispering, "I will not forget you." For a moment, he looked down at the river and saw his reflection, not the cunning man of old, but a weary face illuminated with humility. His eyes held no deceit now, only truth and wonder. A soft wind rose, carrying the faint echoes of the divine voice he had heard. It brushed against his cheek like a blessing, and Jacob bowed his head beneath it. The world around him had not changed, yet everything within him had. He found a smooth stone beside the water and sat. The river sang softly, its rhythm steady, eternal. Jacob leaned his head back, the sunlight warm on his scarred skin. He thought of Bethel, of the ladder of angels, the promise spoken long ago. That night, he had been a dreamer. This night, he had been remade. He had seen the same God, not in vision, but in touch, in wound, in mercy. His lips moved silently in prayer. "You have kept your word. You did not forsake me. You broke me to bless me." Tears slid down his cheeks. He no longer wept from fear or shame, but gratitude. And as the morning ripened into light, Jacob felt the unseen gaze of heaven still upon him. A father watching his son rise again. From across the plain, Jacob could now see movement. His family stirring at the far side of the river, tiny figures against the golden light. Rachel holding Joseph, Leah guiding the servants, the children's laughter faint in the wind. He smiled, though tears blurred his vision. "They will not know what happened here," he murmured, "but they will see its mark on me." He stood, leaning on his staff. The pain shot through his hip again, but he welcomed it. It was his covenant. It was his covenant. His reminder that blessing often wears the face of struggle. He took a step forward, then another. His limp caught the light of morning like a signature written in gold, and as he walked toward his family, the name Israel followed him like music. As Jacob stepped onto the far bank, Rachel ran to him. She stopped short, seeing the pain in his gait, but the light in his eyes stilled her words. He embraced her, pressing his face into her hair. "It is done," he whispered. God was here. Leah stood behind, watching, her eyes softening. The children gathered around, wide-eyed, sensing something holy clinging to the morning air. Jacob lifted his face to the sky. "The Lord has blessed me beyond measure," he said aloud, voice steady, not with flocks or silver, but with a new heart. Rachel touched his side gently, feeling the tremor in his leg. "You walk differently," she said. He smiled. "Yes," he answered. "Because I am no longer running." The sun rose higher, spilling fire across the desert hills. Jacob and his family moved slowly through the open plain, the wind lifting the edges of their cloaks. Every step reminded Jacob of the wound in his side, but he welcomed it. A rhythm of pain that beat in time with grace. Ahead, the dust shimmered, the sign of approaching riders. His heart quickened. Esau, the brother he had wronged, the brother who had sworn vengeance. Rachel glanced at him, fear flickering in her dark eyes. "Will he forgive you?" she whispered. Jacob looked toward the horizon. "If God has spared me face to face," he said quietly, "then he can soften the heart of my brother." He arranged his family behind him, servants, children, wives, and limped forward alone. His shadow stretched long before him, bending with the morning light. Every breath was a prayer, every step a surrender. The deceiver no longer led. The redeemed now walked to meet his past. The dust drew closer, and now Jacob could see him. Esau, massive and broad, his beard red like fire in the sun. The years had not softened him, but there was a steadiness in his stride that made Jacob tremble. Jacob bowed low, pressing his face into the earth 7 times as he approached. "My lord, my brother," he murmured, voice cracking with humility. Esau dismounted. The ground between them glowed with light and silence. Jacob dared not lift his head. Then, in one thunderous motion, Esau ran, not to strike, but to embrace. His arms wrapped around Jacob, lifting him from the dust. The brothers wept, their cries breaking the morning open like song. All the years of running ended in that single moment. No vengeance, no wrath, only grace, flowing from man to man as it had from heaven to earth. Esau's laughter broke through his tears. "Brother," he said, voice thick with emotion, "what madness drove you to bow before me like that?" Jacob smiled through trembling lips. "The madness of grace. I have seen the face of God, and now I see it again in yours." Esau looked at him, confused for a moment, then smiled, wide, genuine, full of years, lost and love reborn. They stood together, their hands clasped. The soldiers behind Esau lowered their weapons. Rachel and Leah approached, the children clinging to their skirts. The morning wind carried the scent of sand and hope. No more fear, no more running. The world, once divided, had been made whole again. They camped together that day. Esau's laughter echoed across the plain as he met the children he had never known. Jacob watched quietly, his hand resting on his staff. "Come home with me," Esau said. "Edom is yours as much as mine." Jacob shook his head gently. "Not yet. My flocks are tender, my children young. Let me come in peace, slowly." Esau studied him and smiled. "You speak truth now, brother. I can wait." The two clasped hands again. No oath was spoken, no bargain struck. Only love, the kind born in brokenness and healed by grace. That night, as the campfires burned low, Jacob lifted his eyes to the stars. "Thank you," he whispered. You gave me a name, and now you've given me peace." Before dawn the next morning, Jacob rose early. The camp still slept, the fire's mere embers. He stood looking toward the hills of Canaan, the land promised long ago. His leg ached with each step, yet the pain now sang like memory. He whispered a prayer into the wind. "You have brought me full circle. I left this land a deceiver. I return as Israel." He looked back at his family sleeping in peace, at the horizon painted faintly with light. The breeze stirred his hair and the folds of his robe. He smiled. "This is the blessing you meant all along." The first light of morning touched his face, and Jacob, now Israel, walked toward it, limping in grace, his every step a hymn of victory. The days that followed were gentle. Jacob's camp moved slowly through the valleys of Canaan, the land gleaming with promise. Each morning, he rose before the sun, leaning on his staff, gazing toward the hills that once marked the edge of his exile. Rachel often found him standing still, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. The man who once schemed now listened. The one who fled now waited. He watched his children play, their laughter threading through the wind like music. Every cry of joy was a promise renewed, every sunrise a whisper of the God who had not abandoned him. Leah noticed the difference first. "You walk slower now," she said one morning, "but your heart moves faster toward heaven." Jacob smiled, the lines around his eyes soft. "When you've wrestled with God," he said, "you learn that every step is sacred." That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Jacob gathered his sons around the fire. The air was rich with the scent of roasting grain and burning cedar. Sparks rose into the twilight like stars. He told them of the night beside the Jabbok River. His voice was low, heavy with awe. He spoke of the stranger who wrestled him till dawn, of the pain, the touch, the name. The children leaned close, their faces lit by firelight. "Father," young Joseph asked, eyes wide, "were you afraid?" Jacob smiled. "Ice," he said, "but fear is not the enemy of faith. It is the doorway to it." The flames crackled as he looked at them one by one. "When God meets you, you will not come away the same. He wounds only to heal. Remember that, my sons. Remember it well." In the days that followed, Jacob built an altar near Shechem. The stones were rough and unshaped, stacked by his own trembling hands. He named the place El Elohe Israel, God, the God of Israel. As he worked, the children watched. Each stone thudded into place with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Sweat streaked his brow, but his movements were sure. When the altar stood complete, he lifted his hands toward heaven. "You have been my fear and my refuge, my wound and my healing," he prayed. "You broke me, and now I stand in your name." Rachel wept quietly beside him. Leah bowed her head. The children were silent. The wind swept through the grass, carrying the scent of earth and eternity. Jacob, once the schemer, now the servant, knew that God's faithfulness had written its name upon his life forever. One night when the camp was quiet and the stars burned clear, Rachel found Jacob awake, seated by the fire. He held the staff across his knees, tracing the scars along its length. "You do not sleep," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I listen." She sat beside him. "To what?" "To the silence," he replied. "It sounds different now. It used to frighten me. Now it feels full." Rachel leaned against him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You've changed, my love." He nodded slowly. "I think," he whispered, "I've finally become the man God saw when he named me." They sat together beneath the vast sky, the same stars that had watched him flee years ago now, bearing witness to his peace. As the seasons turned, Jacob's household prospered. His herds grew, his tents spread across the plains, yet every day began and ended with the same ritual. Jacob touching his wounded hip before rising, whispering, "Thank you." He had learned that blessing was not the absence of pain. but the presence of God in it. His sons grew strong, his wives found peace. The camp became a place of laughter and prayer. The limp never left him, but neither did the light. Sometimes, when the wind rose at twilight, he thought he heard it again. The voice from that long night by the river. "You have prevailed." And Jacob would smile. Tears in his eyes. "No," he would murmur, "you prevailed in me." The years had woven silver into Jacob's hair. His body had grown thin, his face lined by both sorrow and joy. Yet his eyes still burned with quiet fire, the same light that had glowed beside the Jabbok long ago. He sat beneath an old terebinth tree, its roots deep in the soil of Canaan. The air smelled of dust and memory. His grandchildren played nearby, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. Joseph, now a young man, knelt beside him. "Grandfather," he said softly, "tell us again the night you met God." Jacob smiled faintly, his gaze drifting toward the horizon where the sun bled into gold. "That night," he said, "I was both lost and found. I wrestled with a man until dawn, and when he touched me, I thought I was undone. But I discovered that sometimes God must break you open before he can dwell inside you." The children grew still, their faces luminous in the fading light. The world seemed to pause as the old patriarch whispered, "Never run from him. If he wrestles you, it is because he loves you." Later that night, as the stars returned to the sky, Jacob sat by the fire with his sons. The flames painted their faces with flickering gold, and silence settled between them like a prayer. He looked at each of them. Reuben, Judah, Levi, Simeon, and finally Joseph, his beloved. "You are the tribes that will bear my name," he said quietly. "Israel. The name God gave me when I stopped running." He placed his hand over his hip, feeling the familiar ache. "This wound has never healed," he said, smiling faintly, "and I thank God for it. It reminds me that he was nearer to me in the pain than in the plenty." The men lowered their heads, humbled by the weight of their father's peace. "Let this be your inheritance," Jacob continued. "Not my flocks or tents, but the truth that God's blessing is not earned. It is wrestled for in the dark and received at dawn." When dawn broke the next day, Jacob asked to be helped to a ridge that overlooked the valley. The years had bowed his frame, but his spirit stood tall. The wind swept through his hair as he gazed out at the land, a tapestry of promise stretching in every direction. He closed his eyes, whispering, "I remember the night you touched me. You have been my God all my life long to this day." Joseph stood beside him, steadying his arm. "You never stopped walking, even when it hurt," he said quietly. Jacob smiled. "That's the secret, my son. The limp is not weakness, it's remembrance." The valley below shimmered with sunlight. For Jacob, every field, every breeze, every ray of light was sacred, because each step had been bought with struggle and grace. That evening, Jacob gathered his family one last time. The air was still. The horizon burned red with sunset. He spoke softly, his words more like wind than voice. "Do not remember me as a man who was strong," he said, "but as one who would not let go. Remember that God does not choose the perfect. He perfects the chosen." Rachel's eyes glistened as she sat beside him, her hand folded in his. The children huddled close. The shadows deepened, and the sound of distant flocks drifted through the air. Jacob looked heavenward, his face alight with the peace of one who has made his journey home. "The God who wrestled me will wrestle with you too," he whispered. "Let him. He only wrestles those he intends to bless." When night came, the stars returned. The same stars that had watched him flee, dream, wrestle, and rise. Jacob lay still beneath them, the desert wind brushing softly over his face. He smiled faintly, his breath slowing. "I am not the man who ran from Esau," he whispered. "I am Israel, the man who saw God and lived." His hand found his staff, one last time, fingers tracing its grain. His lips moved in silent prayer. Then, with the peace of one who has wrestled and been embraced, Jacob closed his eyes. Outside, the wind carried his legacy across the tents, the story of the man who limped toward God and found blessing in the wound. And in the hush of night, the stars seemed to bow,